Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Botmock. Botmock is a voice prototyping tool, and it is if you're just getting into voice, or if you've been into voice for quite a while and you're looking at the tool set that you use and you're looking for something that will enable you to have a decent quick workflow. And what Botmock does that's unique to Botmock from what I've seen from all of the other tools available is it allows you to collaborate on the design within the tool. So you don't have to necessarily, have all of your post-it notes all scattered across the wall and work on that until you've got something that is, as good as it can be, and you take feedback from people and then you put it into your prototyping tool. You can start prototyping, you can invite your team to it, they can make comments on it, similar to you would make comments on a Word document by highlighting some text and sticking a comment in there. So it's a really good collaborative tool that will literally take you from ideation right through to an end product prototyped. Amy, our guest today, actually makes some pretty positive comments about Botmock throughout the episode, so it is being endorsed right here by Amy Stapleton, our guest today. Do check it out. You can go and get a free trial if you go to botmock.com/VUX World. That's BOTMOCK.com/VUX World. Today's episode, I mentioned our guest in the intro there. We are speaking to Amy Stapleton of Tellables. Amy, ex-NASA, talk about brains, ex-NASA, currently founder of Tellables, been building skills since about 2016, and we're going to be talking all about Amy's experience in skill building, Amy's design choices, and some of the considerations and challenges that she faced creating her latest skill, chocolate box, and we're going to, my box of chocolates rather, and we're going to get into some real detail around some of these design decisions, some of the technical challenges, and some of the tooling challenges as well, actually. We're talking about situational design, we're talking about choosing to use the Amazon Poly voices rather than recording your own audio or getting voice actors in to do your own audio. We're going to be talking about challenges around the interaction model and all around navigation, understanding where you are within the experience, how to get people to return to the experience, content management, a whole load of interesting stuff. You're going to absolutely love this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm obviously joined by Dustin Coates, as I am each week in the hot seat doing the co-hosting. We're chatting to Amy Stapleton of Tellables, and this is VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado, welcome to the show.
Amy Stapleton, welcome to VUX World.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. There's a couple of people who we've had. I think we've had a few of them on the podcast, but there's like a handful of people who were the first people that I kind of come across when first starting VUX World and first kind of looking out for like who's actually building stuff in voice. Do you know what I mean? And Tellables, I'm pretty sure, I'll have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure that Tellables is one of the first companies that I followed on Twitter.
Oh, wow.
So there
That's
you go.
That's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, so there you go. So you've been doing voice for a couple of years now then?
Yeah. So, my story is that I was working at NASA as an IT manager, and then I was able to retire early. So at the end of 2015, I was already planning to do stuff with voice, and the timing was good because, Amazon had already come out with the Alexa device. So we launched our first skill like in early 2016. So we got kind of an early jump. And then the Tricky Genie skill, which is our most popular one, that was like the spring of 2016. So again, it was, good timing.
Cool. And Dustin, you had the pleasure of meeting Amy at the Alexa conference recently?
Yeah, it was a great pleasure. We've been chatting on email, and it's good to meet in person. It's good with these voice conferences where you see people where you go, oh, okay, that's who that is. Now I'll actually see them in person, and got to share a lot of knowledge as well. So I think that's another benefit of these conferences too.
Cool. So Amy, you did a talk over there.
Yeah, so I did a talk about using Alexa for storytelling, and I also enjoyed Dustin's talk on the search, the voice search stuff. So I'm anxious to try some of that out and some of my skills too.
So, weird kind of shift, is it not then, from NASA presumably doing some form of rocket science or something like that over to storytelling and voice? What was all that about? What made you kind of focus on voice and start Tellables and go all in on voice?
Well, I got my degrees like in English and German language and literature and stuff. So my background is more humanities. I've always been interested in writing and storytelling. Shifted into a technology career because that's just kind of like how things happened for me and how I was able to make my money. So NASA, I was actually helping with their enterprise applications. I have a background in SAP, and they were implementing SAP financial management software. So that's kind of what happened. But in 2013, I think I started going to like speech tech conferences and looking to see what was coming out in the future. And I saw Jibo, and I thought, hey, a personality like that is really going to need stories to tell. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to do when I retired. And again, like I said, the timing was good because the Alexa device was launched, I guess, in 2014? It was available in 2015, so we could already start playing around with that. So it's a perfect, really, device to try this storytelling stuff out on, the interactive stories, and just see what works and what doesn't work. I mean, I'm still kind of waiting for more of a social robot type thing to come around. The fact that Alexa is inside the smart speaker and she's not a real personality makes it a little bit more difficult to see her as a storyteller, but I think that's going to evolve, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, exploring.
Wasn't Jibo something like that? Jibo doesn't exist anymore, does it?
Well, I think they announced that they pretty much closed down. I mean, they got a lot of funding. It was a very ambitious project because it was something like Alexa. It could understand and speak, and it had its own voice, but it had motion and a face, and in order to program for it, you had to do not just the interaction, but also the animatronics and all that kind of stuff. And I think with Amazon coming in with the Alexa device, and then Google Assistant and all that, people weren't willing to pay like $800 for this robot that kind of did stuff but didn't do anything nearly as well as Alexa.
Are there other assistants with faces that are on your radar right now?
To be honest with you, I kind of stopped following that because I just got so disappointed. You'd go to CES and then you'd see these robots. I mean, one was like Mayfield, I think, had one, although it didn't really talk, but they got a lot of press, and they just don't, they just don't ever get to the next level, because to have that personality and then be able to speak to it and have it respond in a meaningful way like you're expecting when you see something with a face, it's just not there yet.
I was just going to ask if you two have seen those hotel robots that I think they're primarily in Asia now, but they bring your food to your door, and I think they have a little face as well. I don't know if they have a voice component, but that may be the future of interactive storytelling. Robots straight to your door to tell you a story.
Yeah. It's weird because the companies that are actually doing the most innovative stuff in this space are really like digital signage companies. So they have the digital signage products that they've embedded in like a robot. I mean, I guess Pepper is the best example, although it's not really digital signage. But if you look at Pepper, it has a screen and it has the voice recognition and the speech. So it's very close to what the state of the art is, but it's still not, it's not really selling. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend time and money doing stories for it because not many people have it.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on so I think Pullstring, Oren Jacobs started out doing this, making toys that have a voice component. And I think on one of the episodes of the VoiceBot podcast, there was kind of like a rundown of some of the things that come out of CES. And there was someone talking there around this toy, it was like a kid's teddy with a screen and a voice assistant and all that sort of stuff. And you were saying about, what originally interested you and all that stuff was around robots telling stories. Does that interest you at all? The concept of like either kids' toys or whatnot with voice assistants built into them?
Yeah, definitely. And as a matter of fact, the Hello Barbie that was done by the I guess it was before it was even Pull String. It was still Toy Talk. It got a lot of bad press, and it's about three or 4 years old now. But if you used it, it was actually a really interesting device. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is you had the Barbie doll, and so the let's say the young girl that's playing with it has the feeling that she's talking to a real person, and that doll would engage her in different types of conversations and ask her what does she want to be when she grew up, and tell her stories in a conversational way that was really effective. And it was hard to do, and I haven't seen anything like that since then. I think it was very innovative, and I guess in a way I'm trying to do something similar with Alexa. The only difference is that my vision is to have an open platform where I can take stories from different authors and then make them available within the context of a live skill that Tellables has already published. So that's kind of like the next step in what we're doing. Is I think that a voice assistant or a storytelling personality is a good way to get stories by other authors out there. Give authors that are kind of underserved a platform for their stories to be heard.
Have you got a particular sort of target market? We're going to get into the technicalities of your kind of skill building and so for those listening, we are going to get into some real technical detail coming up. To put that into context, do you have a target market for the stories that you create? Is it targeted at children? Is it targeted at kind of like older adults? Is it targeted kind of somewhere? And have you got a target market, or are they stories for everyone?
I think it's kind of both. And in a way, there are target markets that have approached me that say, hey, we'd really like to have this community storytelling experience in like a senior community. And then I've also had teachers say, hey, we'd really like to have this kind of open platform where, kids can create their own stories and then hear them as part of this experience. And then I've had authors that like to write flash fiction for just a general audience say, hey, we'd love to get some of our flash fiction stories into your box of chocolates concept. So I think the idea kind of resonates across the board, but we would probably need to create like a separate skill, or at least separate boxes of chocolate assortments aimed at different audiences, because everybody likes a different type of story.
So tell us a little bit more about the box of chocolates then. This is the latest skill you've been working on.
Right. So the concept was to have the framework of the interaction designed so that it's out there, it's live, but it's extensible in the sense that every month we add new content. And so the way we designed it is that we have a box of chocolates. It's a virtual chocolate box with 12 individual candies in it every month. We actually create a little image for each of the candies, and they're kind of whimsical because the stories right now are more like funny stories. So you can see the picture of the candy on your Echo Show or in your Alexa skill card as you listen to the story. And then you can hear the story, and afterwards there's like a little interaction where Alexa makes a comment, and then she asks you a question, and then she has a response based on how you respond to the story. And we've even incorporated kind of a party game into it where she'll send a truth or dare question at the end of each story so that you can take turns kind of answering the question or whatever. So it's got a lot built into it, but the idea is that it's really every month it's like an anthology of stories. But if you think about it, in a voice first world or a voice only world, it's difficult to present like 12 stories and then have people give them the ability to choose a story, and then also give them the ability to go back and hear a story that they've heard once again, or tell somebody about that story. So that's kind of why we came up with the chocolate concept. And I also just like the idea of saying, hey, Alexa, open my box of chocolates, because I think it sounds good.
So was that choice, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's so the box of chocolate concept is that the metaphor is that all of the stories are stored within a box of chocolates, and they've all got kind of like chocolatey names, haven't they? Like the praline punch or what have you. There's lots of different like chocolate based names. I should know miles more than this because I love chocolate. I should be able to just reel them off like that. So, and then you mentioned that you release new ones every month. So, do you start the start of the month with a full box of chocolates and then release a whole new box of chocolates the month after? Or do you start with 3 chocolates, 3 stories, and then throughout the month you release more? How does your kind of rollout work?
So the way it works now is every month, as long as we can, kind of keep up, we release the entire box of 12. And each box has like a beginning date and an expiration date. So if you, like, let's say you've never used the skill before and you say, like this month, which is January, you say, Alexa, open my box of chocolates. She'll bring you the current box and you'll go into the January box, and she'll give you an opportunity to hear what's in the box, and then you can work your way through all 12 chocolates. If you run out of chocolates and you're waiting for the February box, if you haven't already listened to some older boxes, like there was one for December, that was the first one, then she'll automatically offer you the opportunity to open up that older box and you can listen to those stories while you're waiting. So again, if you don't listen to the skill until February, the first box you'll be presented with is the February assortment, and then you'll be able to go back and listen to the January assortment and the December assortment. But at any point in time, like assume that you're an author and you have one of your stories in the December box, you can always go back and ask for that candy specifically. You can either open assortment 1 by asking Alexa to open assortment 1, or you can just say, hey, Alexa, get me the extra sticky caramel truffle, which happens to be one of the candies in the stories in the first box. And so in order to kind of aid the whole process, we list the assortments with all the candies on our website. And the thought is that if people are like really get into this, then they could go onto the website and they can actually print out a PDF that lists out what all the candy names are for that particular assortment.
And that must be interesting, releasing these the first of every month, the new stories. What does that usage data look like? Is everyone eating all the chocolates in one sitting and doing that, or are they savoring it over the month?
To be honest with you, there's not that many people using it right now. And looking at the usage data, a lot of people stop after 1 or 2 candies. I think, again, the fact that we're doing something a little bit different. We're also using the poly voices. It doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody. And I think a lot of people probably see my box of chocolates and they open it not knowing that it's going to be like a storytelling thing, because, you don't naturally associate chocolates with stories. So they might not continue on. But in my experience, for that audience that really enjoys the stories, they do tend to listen to multiple stories at once, and then they'll stop and they'll come back and finish the box. But I think we're still trying to figure out who the right types of listeners are for this type of thing.
You talked about the poly voices and how that's not for everyone. What do you mean by that?
I think that the statistics or the research shows that most people that listen to a story right now from a smart speaker, they really want to hear it in a human narrated voice. Our stories are very short. I mean, they're very short. They're usually 90 seconds or less, a little bit less than a minute and a half. But still, you have to kind of be in the right mindset for that. We use the poly voices for a number of different reasons, but I want people to have the sense that they're not listening to like a streaming audiobook. I want them to feel like they're having a conversation. And so we've also created these characters for our chocolatiers, and we've given each of the chocolatiers a voice. So whenever you hear that specific voice, hopefully over time you'll relate it to that chocolatier. But I think in general, when people hear the poly voices and they think, okay, it's a story, it could be a bit of a turn off.
Are you going in there and with the SSML changing up the voices, the prosody or the rate or anything?
Yes and no. I mean, we spend actually quite a bit of time working on the stories to use phraseology that kind of works with a voice, and we do some markup, but I try to make it. The more markup you have in there with changing pitch and everything, it sometimes just doesn't sound good. So it would be interesting to see if people listen to the voices. That they can give me some feedback, and if they think the stories are good or not. I mean, we use like basically three of the U.S. voices. We're using one of the UK voices right now, and then we may add some voices later. But the stories are also supposed to be funny, and to do a punchline or something that's like funny in that poly voice is really hard. So a lot of times we just have to try to find like the last sentence that's really going to have a punch where it might make you laugh or whatever. But it's a bit of a struggle.
Be interesting to know if there's any. You said that people tend to like to hear a real human voice. Is there any sort of data behind that? Do you know if there's any studies being done on people's preference in terms of what kind of voices are used on their voice assistants?
I personally don't have any of the data. I know that Amazon, I've talked to them a bunch of times about it, and they swear up and down that there's much higher engagement for skills that have human voices as opposed to the Polly or the Alexa voice. And for their kid-directed skills, like if you wanted to license content to Amazon for free time, they don't want you to use text-to-speech voices. I mean, like only in the rarest circumstances. So it's we're going down a path that most people that are in storytelling probably aren't going down anymore. But I'm doing that because I just feel like it's. When you're having a conversation with Alexa, which is one of the things we're trying to do with the story skill, I mean, you actually are having a mini discussion with her after the story. You don't really want to mix the human narrated stories and the Alexa voice, and it's just that's kind of a weird mixture.
Some do it well though, don't they? I mean, Yes Sire is a good example of where you can use the machine generated voice and still have something that's a really good experience.
Yeah, when you think about Yes Sire and our Tricky Genie skill are both kind of contemporary. I mean, they came out maybe about the same time. Tricky Genie may have been even a little earlier. And it is interesting because Tricky Genie continues to be very popular, and we only use Alexa's voice in that skill. So I do think, but again, the Yes Sire and the Tricky Genie, they're not really storytelling skills, right? I mean, Tricky Genie is more like a little critical thinking game that's really fast. You can do it like in 2 minutes. And Yes Sire is also kind of more of a strategy game. It's not like an immersive thing. The box of chocolates is really more of a, put your feet up, pour yourself a cup of tea, listen to a story that's going to take a minute and a half, and then try to kind of relate to the story or share it with you're in a discussion with your friends or whatever. So that really is more of a classic storytelling thing.
And so we've got a few things to discuss. One of them, so the concept of using the text-to-speech voices. I mean, to be honest, for those of you that haven't tried it, try it out, and I'll try and see if I can whip some of the audio snippets out to play to give people an idea of the different voices that are used, because there is diversity in there. It's not like there's a monotonous same voice all the time. It's every story is told in a different voice, and there's a lot of different sort of styles and stuff, isn't there? So it's not like I don't know. It's not kind of blatantly obvious that it's a standard Alexa skill kind of thing. It's still unique in that it uses a lot of different voices. But what about you were saying in terms of the way that you kind of designed it was based on around a box of chocolates and hoping to try and help people maybe navigate things a bit easier. Because I think we spoke, Dustin, do you remember when we spoke to Georgia Quinter and we were talking about Six Swords, and one of the things that he said he used to design, I think it was the way that you can choose a language or an accent. So I think it's called the method of Loki, which kind of it uses like a house or something, so people can, because navigating menus through voice can be quite difficult. So I think what you're saying is it uses this concept of a house, and you enter the house, it's like a college, and you can turn right if you want a male voice and left if you want a female voice. You can go into the drawing room for males and the wherever for females, or you can go, so if you go like into the drawing room for males, then you can say that, you said something like, if you want an elf style voice, then you can go left through to this room. If you want a wizard style voice, you can go right to that room, to try and help people picture the house as opposed to picture the options. That sounds like a similar kind of angle that you've gone down for the architecture of this, is trying to make people think about the type of chocolate and the box that it's associated with, rather than trying to get them to remember the story. Does that describe it right?
Yeah, in a way, I wanted to come up with a structure that people could kind of grasp after they've used the skill a few times. So there are always 12 chocolates in the box. And to get back to kind of this conversation about situational design or whatever, I wanted to give people some flexibility. Since they know there are always 12 chocolates in an assortment, they can ask for a candy by number. If they don't ask for it by number, then they also know that once they open the box, Alexa, who's sharing the chocolates with them, she'll take them through the candies consecutively, one by one, and she'll ask them if they give them a little hint about what's in the chocolate and what's in the story, and ask if they want to hear it. And if they say yes, then basically they can just like go through the whole box, 1 through 12. They also have the ability to hear what the chocolate's about, because maybe the story is not so funny. We're trying to combine different types of stories in there. And if they find out that one of the chocolates is maybe a little bitter, then they have the option of skipping that story. Just like if they look at a chocolate and they decide they don't want to eat that one, they can move on to the next one. She'll also give you a chance to come back and taste one that you've skipped. So again, it just makes it easier to kind of navigate. And we've also, in the interaction model, we add the names of the chocolate, so that each chocolate has a specific, a unique name. And because each chocolate has a unique name, we can add that to the interaction model so that you can ask for a chocolate and its associated story by its name. So every month we update the interaction model when we publish a new assortment to add those candy names. And again, if somebody's kind of savvy and they've figured out how the skill works, they could go in there and they could ask for that specific story by name. And it doesn't matter like how old the story is. It could be something we published months ago. They could still get right to that story by asking for the chocolate name. And I kind of like that idea, because like in the Tricky Genie skill, we have tons and tons and tons of scenarios, but you can never ask for a specific one, or go back to it. It basically just serves up what you haven't heard yet. So I wanted to give them that kind of navigation possibilities, and that's all kind of inside the box idea.
You mentioned situational design there. I've seen a couple of Twitch videos of Paul Cutsinger kind of explaining this and going through this, and it seems to be very much the way that people are approaching it, certainly towards the back end of last year, and trying to move away from the flow chart, tree-based decision tree kind of model and moving towards, the situational design. For those that haven't come across it, can you explain a little bit about situational design and how you've applied that?
Yeah, I think the basic concept is that if you think of like a phone tree, your typical phone tree where you can, press 3 to go to this department. And once you go to that department, then you have like another decision you have to do. Are you interested in reservations, or are you interested in, your seat or something? You have to like make a choice and then you go down. So if you really are interested in changing your seat, you may have had to go through a whole bunch of different branches before you could actually get to the part where you can change your seat assignment. Instead of just being able to go in and say, I want to change my seat assignment, you had to, ask for all this other stuff first. So what you're doing in the situational design is you're like turning everything so that it's like horizontal. All your menu options are like listed at the top, like in a line, and you can just go wherever you want to go. So using the my box of chocolates as an example, if you want to get to a specific store, you can just say, hey, Alexa, open my box of chocolates and get me the extra sticky caramel truffle. And you'll go right there. There's also, other complexities where if you open the skill and you're a returning user, then right away the skill has to know what situation are you in. You're a returning user. You haven't opened the latest box of chocolates yet, so I'm going to open the latest box and I'm going to ask you if you're ready for if you want to hear what's in the assortment, and ask you if you want the first one. But if you're a returning user and you've already finished the current box of chocolates and you have some old ones you haven't heard yet, then you're in the situation where I'm going to, ask you, would you like to hear a story you haven't heard yet? So all of those situations are kind of like states, and you have to know what state that particular user is in, and that information has to be maintained in a certain way. And, kind of my challenge is it's really hard to get like tools that help you prototype all that. So, creating something as complex as the box of chocolates, even though it sounds like a simple thing, it was a major headache just designing that and making sure all the, I didn't have like all these repetitive code pieces in there. Also making sure that I was dealing with every possible situation that a user could be in. So I'm looking forward to more tools that will support that kind of complex skill design.
What were some of the things that you did or you found useful to build that in the end?
Well, I did a combination of trying to create the flow in Lucidcharts, but then I would have to go through and I would have to look at every time that I had something repetitive. And I ended up by making, modules. So I have like a module for offer next candy and a module for open new assortment. And offer next candy comes up over and over and over again, but in different situations. But instead of having to, recreate all of that code, you just go to a specific module and make that module such that it works regardless of what situation the person is when you're ready to offer them another candy. And then alongside with the Lucidchart, I did just a script, like a Word document, where you're actually writing out the interchange, what Alexa says, what the person says, what Alexa says, what the person says, in every possible situation you can think of, and you have multiple, scripts, and then tie those back to what you've got in your flow chart, and then test it all out. But still, I made so many mistakes in the flow. I had to go back and redesign it multiple times, and it gets expensive because you're sending it to your developer over again, and there are costs associated with that.
That's interesting. That so, I'm assuming, do you use any kind of like specific tools to do the design, or is it a case of, I don't know, PowerPoint and post-it notes and whiteboards and stuff like that? Is there any things that you use to do this, or is it literally like PowerPoint, Word documents and stuff like that? What sort of tooling do you use to go about the design?
The actual design, I relied heavily on the Lucidcharts. But again, that's a flow charting tool. You can't get away from some types of flows. But for the business logic, I call it business logic, but there's a lot of logical decisions that happen in a skill like that, where you're looking at what situation is the user in, and based on that situation, you do either, X, Y, or Z. So you have a lot of decisions in there that have to be designed out. So I did that in Lucidchart. And that's mainly it, Lucidchart and Word for the design. Now, like underpinning the content, we use Airtable, a very complicated form of Airtable to manage all the content, the stories, and then the conversational part that go along with the stories. And we put that into DynamoDB. But the biggest challenge right now is really the design part. When I was at the Alexa conference, I looked to see what BotMock has, and they've got really the good beginnings of like a prototyping tool that would help. But still, I think that some work needs to be done to come up with a tool that really supports the full-blown situational design, where you can see, like at a press of a button, all of the different situations that you need to make sure you have accounted for in your design. All right, like in BotMock, you can create all of your intents, and it will automatically generate your interaction model based on those intents. But it would be really cool if along with that, you could see all the different situations that were associated with those intents, because that's a different way of looking at it. And that's the part that the more complex skill you have with multiple, situational, multiple situations the user can be in, where you need to make sure that's accounted for.
It does sound like a complex. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
It's hard to wrap your mind around, right?
It is. Have you had, Dustin, in terms of the stuff that you've built, how do you tend to use kind of like a flowcharty, diagrammy sort of thing, or do you kind of use this situational design?
So what I'll do often is I'll sketch it out. I won't use a tool necessarily online, but I will sketch it out. I will be also completely honest. I will jump into code often a little bit too quickly. It does come back with some pains when you have to go back and change things, and when you find things aren't flowing super well. But I agree that there's a space for some tooling here to make it easier, especially for those people who aren't going to be able to jump directly into code. And you mentioned this, Amy, that it's expensive because you have to go back to your developers. So you have then an external developer or a freelancer that you work with, is that right?
Right.
And how did you go about, or how do you recommend people find a developer if they need someone to build these voice applications? Is it sufficient to go with a developer who hasn't worked in voice before, or is it really important that they have that background as well?
I personally think it's very important to find somebody that's done a lot of skills that knows how to do it. What a good way is to go to one of these conferences, like the Alexa conference or the upcoming Voice Summit, and just meet people. There surprisingly are a lot of really good voice skill developers on the market that are available right now. So I would recommend trying to find one of those first.
Mm. Have you come into any conflicts in terms of people like trying to navigate around the skill? So if you've got everything, so box of chocolates, and we spoke beforehand, didn't we, about the BBC CBeebies skill. We had a chat with Paul Jackson. One of the things he was saying is that what they've tried to do is they've tried to put a whole load of stories into one skill. So one half of it is stories, the other half of it's games, and they're trying to do a whole load within one skill. And from what Paul was saying, Amazon would prefer that people create lots of individual skills to do this stuff. And what Paul was saying is he's coming into challenges where, for example, if you have an intent that is used in one story, and then you want to use that same intent or something very similar in a game, there's conflicts there. Have you come across any kind of conflicts like along those lines? Because you're doing the same thing, aren't you? You've got lots and lots of different stories, all operating at this high, horizontal, flat level. Have you come into any kind of like challenges from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the design. And I think what Paul was saying too is discoverability is such an issue that if you have a brand, it's great if you could have one skill. The guys that do the magic door, they just have one skill, and there's a lot of different things within that, but it's essentially one story world, right? If you're creating a one like umbrella skill where people can go in to find all your stories, but they're different episodes, and then let's say you have an intent that cross the bridge, right? But cross the bridge is used as a choice in multiple branching stories. Then there might be a conflict, and you might not know when someone says cross the bridge what story they're talking about. So with the box of chocolates, we tried to deal with that up front by saying, okay, basically the intent is either the name of a candy or a candy number. And the candy names are unique across all boxes. And then the candy numbers 1 through 12, if you just say 1 through 12, that only works with the current box. If you want to ask for a candy in an older assortment by its number, then you have to give the assortment number and the candy number. I mean, it's kind of a little bit complicated, but if you train the users to do that, then you basically don't have any conflict anymore because of the design. But if the more stuff you're putting in one skill, the more of an issue there is. And we have questions at the end of each story, but the answers are always either yes, no, option 1, option 2, or bitter or sweet. And if someone says bitter or sweet, we know which question we've just asked them. So there's not a conflict in terms of trying to figure out what question they answered. We just get them the response for that particular story. So there's some constraints that make it a not quite natural conversational experience, but we're trying to work within the constraints of the model as it exists today.
Do you pull in, especially at that top level, any personalization or context details to help route those requests?
You mean when somebody first comes in and opens the skill, or?
Right. After a story, when you're answering questions, that seems pretty straightforward. You can scope it to those questions, right?
Right.
However, if they're asking for a story in general, or like you said, they just had opened the skill, maybe not for the first time, but they're coming back to it from before. Are you pulling in anything there? Or let's say we just finished the story and we've finished the questions. Are you leveraging what they've already heard or anything like that to help route those requests?
Well, the only thing that we're really doing in terms of storing the user data is we know exactly where they are, which chocolate stories they've already consumed, and we can, if they come back, based on how often they come back, we give them little encouraging statements when they return. And we know, like Alexa might say when they return, hey, it was nice sharing the extra sticky caramel truffle and the prom date praline with you last time you were here. Now you still have 10 candies left in this box. Would you like to open the next candy? So we know things like that, but we're not doing any account linking at this point in time, and we're not storing their answers to the questions and using that to figure out like what kind of question to ask them in the future. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I would like to do, but we're not doing that currently.
Have you got any in any of the skills, not just necessarily the chocolate box? Have you done any exploration with like in-skill purchasing?
We have not. So we looked at doing that for my box of chocolates. We were pretty heavily encouraged by Amazon to try that. We actually built in different versions of it. We were going to offer some premium candies, so you could pay $1.99 or whatever to get some free premium chocolates per box. And then we went to like a consumable model. We had some technical difficulties with that, both the premium and the consumable. It's hard to remember which box they've bought those candies for. If you have like a whole bunch of boxes, the problem comes if somebody disables your skill, and then you lose that information. So we went with finally we went with a subscription model, which seems to work. So the idea was that you could have half the chocolates for free, and then if you were a member of the chocolate club and you subscribed, you would get the whole box every month. But we ended up not going with that. We just sort of turned it off for now because, number one, we don't really have an audience for the chocolate stories yet. We don't even know like who's going to like them. We're trying to get authors to provide stories for us that we can use in the chocolates to give the authors some promotion, let people hear their stories. So we don't want to exclude people from hearing the stories. And then number two, if you did the monetization at this point, it limited where you could publish the skill, right? And I really wanted this to be available in Canada and the UK, other English-speaking markets. So we decided to just kind of wait, try it out, see what happens, and then maybe add the subscriptions later.
Tell you where Amazon could, not that they need to do this, by the way, because I've seen a slide before that said that essentially, let's say that we've got a screen in front of us, let's say that screen represents the size of Amazon. You could fit Walmart and Target and Tesco's and all of the massive retailers into like the bottom quarter. So Amazon obviously doesn't need to do anything in particular, but for this in particular skill, what could be quite good is in-skill purchases or some form of transaction where if someone gets to the end of a box of chocolates, they can get 50% off a box of chocolates bought through Amazon, you get a little kickback for sending the traffic their way, and Amazon handle all the deliveries.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Amazon could probably do it. If anybody could, it would be Amazon.
Yeah, maybe that's an idea for an incentive for Amazon, is to, at the end of someone's skill, at the end of someone's experience, find a way of referring them to some sort of product and give the developer a kickback.
I like it.
What advice would you give to either would-be storytellers or creatives or writers wanting to kind of approach the voice kind of space, or at the same time either hobbyist developers or people who are wanting to kind of get the sleeves rolled up and figure out what Alexa's all about in 2019? What advice would you give across the board for designers, creatives, and developers?
Well, especially if you're in the storytelling space, you could try out the blueprints first. There's a lot of really good blueprints for stories, just to kind of see what works, what you like, what you don't like. I'd also say definitely go in and listen to what other people are doing. Look at some of the top story skills that are out there. Many of them are that like choose your own adventure type thing, the branching, nonlinear stories. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of that particular type of storytelling, but look at the ones that are working. I think it's a little problematic because if you go in that realm, there are already some pretty big dollars being spent on that type of thing. That, high production costs with human narrators, sound effects, studio, all that. So it's kind of hard to compete as just a hobby storyteller. But I would listen to them, see, what you like, and kind of do what I'm doing, which is just follow the path that you feel, most comfortable with, that you're writing stuff, the kind of thing that you would want to listen to, things that you enjoy, and manage your expectations. I don't think anybody's going to get rich off of this in the next couple of years. I think we're still trying to figure it out. But as long as you're enjoying it, and then I guess my biggest advice would be think about what you're doing, and if you're really serious about it, make sure that you're creating a model where you can update your content very frequently, right? I mean, the Tricky Genie skill has been out there since 2016, but I regularly add new episodes. So that's part of the care and feeding of making it appealing for people to come back to. That's kind of the concept behind the box of chocolates, was we were going to have new content every month, and we were going to try to source that from outside authors. So if you're in the storytelling market, if you just do like one episode and you're not going to continue to put new content in there, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense, frankly.
You said, so we've spoke about you doing the design and then using a developer to do the build, but then now you're saying that actually you add stuff and you maintain stuff. How does that look like? Are you hopping into the code to do these updates, or are you using a tool like a content management system of some description to maintain and improve and iterate these skills?
Yeah, so from the very beginning, Tellables has had its own content management system. So that's like key to what we're doing. So me as the author, I can just go into a web UI, and I can add the content, and then I can publish it, and it gets into the live skill automatically with no coding. The only difference with the chocolate skill is that I need to update the interaction model every month because I'm adding the chocolate names, the names of the candies. But other than that, I wouldn't have to resubmit the skill at all, because the content just goes into is available in the server.
And is this through Airtable, like you were mentioning earlier?
The chocolate skill right now is through Airtable because we had kind of more of a complex design. All the other ones, the Tricky Genie, Fake History, Listening Comprehension, those ones are our original content management system that was developed by my co-founder who I worked with at NASA, and that's kind of a Java-based thing on the back end, and it's just a web UI for me. It's really nice. I'm kind of hoping that we can do a web UI like that for the chocolates, because moving stuff from Airtable to DynamoDB it's kind of a pain. It's sort of a manual step right now.
And why are you sending it from Airtable to DynamoDB? What are the benefits that come with that sort of movement step?
Well, in DynamoDB, we have it structured like more of a document type of table, so that when the developer goes to get it, he can just like pull it over once, and he's not, like hitting it multiple times. We have it structured based on like data sets. Within Airtable, it's much more of a relational design, but Airtable does have a kind of a UI component that's easier for me to go in and like, put the SSML with all those long text fields and the comments and all that kind of stuff. So Airtable is sort of like, for me, the DynamoDB design is better from a developer standpoint to go grab the content.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Airtable. You're not the first Alexa builder, voice builder, who has told me that they use Airtable for this. Even some devs who can easily go in and edit the code, edit the content right within there, they find that being able to just go within Airtable and add it right there just speeds up the process so much.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted the design of the skill to look like in terms of the type of content that I would need to make dynamic. I mean, some of, very little bit of the content is obviously it's hard coded. Some of the things Alexa says are hard coded, but most of the stuff is dynamic. But again, I didn't know what the structure would be. So if you are still kind of playing around with things, it's nice to do it in Airtable rather than having to, like code something from scratch. But once the design gets more stable, I think it'd be nice to have like a web UI that's a more traditional web UI. At least that's my perspective as a content creator. I don't really like using Airtable long term.
So what is Airtable? I've never come across Airtable before.
It's an online relational database that's free to use in a certain tier, and then you can just add your own, fields and rows and create your tables. And so we have for each box of chocolates, we have multiple tables, and what's called one Airtable base. We have, like a table for the assortment description. We have a table for all the candies. We have a table for the comments. We have a table for the questions and the answers, and all that just goes together. And then we shove it over in a document format to our, almost like a JSON format, really, into DynamoDB, and then we can access all that from the Alexa skill code. Yeah, so it's pretty good. I mean, and again, I don't think it's it's not hugely scalable if you're creating a lot of complex content, but for what we're doing, which is really heavy storytelling stuff, it's nice. I mean, I had considered doing something in WordPress or whatever, but Airtable is just much easier to use. I mean, I was able to set that up on my own.
Cool. I'll put the links down there in the show notes for that if people want to check it out. Dustin, any final thoughts or any final questions for Amy?
No, I think this was a really great insight, and really appreciate you coming and speaking with us, Amy.
Yeah, no, it was great. Thanks for chatting. I've always enjoyed your podcast because I like the fact that you get down into the nitty gritty. So hopefully this will help some other people.
Indeed, I'm sure it will. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've managed to do that again today. I think we've got into some real detail there. I think definitely for those people listening, check out Tellables, check out Chocolate Box, and also check out anything you can find on situational design. Maybe I'll try and put that link from Paul Kutsinger from Twitch in the show notes as well, because it's well worth checking out. So Amy, where can people I'll put the links to to all of the skills that we've discussed in the show notes. So if you want to try any of Tellable's skills and any of Amy's skills, you can just head to the show notes and find them there. But where can people find you if they wanted to follow your journey or kind of reach out to you online?
Yeah, so you can check out the website at tellables.com. My Twitter handle is kind of weird. It's talks2bots with the number 2. That's basically it, I think.
Cool. We'll put the links in the show notes. And Amy, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Kane and Dustin. I really appreciate it.
That was Amy Stapleton of Tellables. Thank you, Amy, for joining us on the podcast. Interesting discussion, that. I know we kind of jumped around a little bit and we talked about tooling and we got back around to tooling again towards the end, but I think there was just so much to get through. I've been really interested in picking Amy's brains for a while. As I said, I'm pretty sure Tellables was one of the first companies I followed on Twitter when I first started getting involved in voice. So I'm so glad to finally get the opportunity to pick Amy's brains on how she's approaching this, because we come across some really interesting challenges throughout that episode and the answers to which haven't yet been fully found. So one is on the design side. How do you actually go about designing these flat skills that don't rely on the flowchart kind of menu structure that we typically see in the IVR systems of the 90s and whatnot? In fact, they still exist, they're still around now, aren't they? So there's interesting design challenges there around how do you actually design it in the first place, and what tooling do you use to do that, which was another challenge is around the tooling. And maybe this is the time on the hype cycle we might be coming down that first kind of bell curve of the hype cycle, and we're realizing now what kind of tools we need to really build these kind of experiences. So it's interesting to get deep into those challenges. And also from a technical perspective, how do you then make sure that because you've got such a wealth of content, how do you make sure that you're not duplicating intents and phrases and not getting crossed wires and all that kind of stuff? So it's interesting to take some learnings from Paul Jackson of the BBC in there as well. It's nice to see that kind of thing has been been applicable. Interesting design choice to use the text-to-speech voices and to really kind of throw everything behind that. Do check out the skill, because there's a lot of different types of voices there, and Amy mentioned that some people don't particularly like it or might not like it. I think it's using the tools that were in the platform at the beginning, I suppose. So it's kind of like it's sticking to the true nature of the smart speaker, which I quite like, because it's, Amy was mentioning a lot of other skills and a lot of interactive stories and having a high production value, and Warner Brothers and stuff like that have ploughed a lot of money into it. But I think that you can get away with being more creative, and then you can really sort of stretch yourself when you're working within a certain tool set, and that's exactly what Amy has done with the box of chocolate skill. So do check it out. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. Thank you, Dustin, for joining us as well. And as always, boys and girls, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.